Lesson 2. Nelson Mandela. Long Walk to Freedom. Before you read. Apartheid is a political system that separates people according to their race. Can you say which of the three countries named below had such a political system until very recently? United States of America, South Africa, Australia. Have you heard of Nelson Mandela? Mandela and his African National Congress spent a lifetime fighting against apartheid. Mandela had to spend 30 years in prison. Finally, democratic elections were held in South Africa in 1994 and Mandela became the first black president of a new nation. In this extract from his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, Mandela speaks about a historic occasion, the inauguration. Can you guess what the occasion might be? Check your guess with this news item from the BBC of 10 May 1994. Mandela becomes South Africa's first black president. Nelson Mandela has become South Africa's first black president after more than 3 centuries of white rule. Mr. Mandela's African National Congress, that is ANC, party won 252 of the 400 seats in the first democratic elections of South Africa's history. The inauguration ceremony took place in the Union Buildings Amphitheatre in Pretoria today, attended by politicians and dignitaries from more than 140 countries around the world. Never, never again will this beautiful land experience the oppression of one by another, said Nelson Mandela in his address. Jubilant scenes on the streets of Pretoria followed the ceremony with blacks, whites and coloreds celebrating together. More than 100,000 South African men, women and children of all races sang and danced with joy. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheatre formed by the Union Buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. The author mentions 10th May as bright and clear. He says this because this was the day when Nelson Mandela sworn in as the first black head of the state South Africa. It was a morning full of hope. Days before this happened, many leaders and dignitaries congratulated him for his victory. It was after years together of struggle that this anti-racist party came into power. Until then, it was a period of white presidents. There was a large gathering in the country's history that many international leaders came together for the inauguration ceremony on the South African soil. The ceremony took place in an open building made of sandstone formed by the Union Buildings in Pretoria. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. Then, Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the republic and its people. To the assembled guests and the watching world, I said, "Today, all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long, must be born a society of what all humanity will be proud." It was a lovely autumn day. Nelson Mandela accompanied his daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as the second deputy president. Then was Thabo Mbeki sworn as the first deputy president. Then, when it was Mandela's turn, he committed respect, protect and abide by the constitution and also agreed to devote himself for the welfare of the republic and the people. The author brings reference to a few lines of his speech where he said that everyone hoped for a new beginning. The new party will stand up against discrimination where all the humanity will be proud. We, who were outlaws not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be hosts to the nations of the world in our own soil. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. He also added that there was a time when South Africa, for practicing apartheid, lost all the international political relationship. Now is the time we are given power. He thanked all the guests, especially the international leaders, for joining them to celebrate the victory towards an equal society where all humans have equal rights and will be treated equally. He mentioned that his government would free everyone of the existing poverty, hardship, and all kinds of inequalities. He also assured that everyone in the country will be equal and no community will be treated inferior. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. He added that there will be no oppression by one another. Finally, he concluded that freedom should rule and may God shower his blessings on their land. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers rolled in perfect formation over the Union buildings. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. As soon as the newly elected president addressed the audience, there was a perfect impressive arrangement of fighter jet, helicopter and armed forces which raised everyone's head up above in the sky. This was done not just for the purpose of accuracy and military force, but to symbolize perfection as well as the military's respect and obedience towards the freely and fairly elected nation. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and Police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before, they would not have saluted but arrested me. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. The high commanders, generals, police, their chests, who have won medals for their bravery, saluted and promised their loyalty. Mandela knew that these commanders who were saluting him now would have arrested him under the previous rule. He was considered as a criminal. The air show was looking so beautiful when the chevron of Impala jets left a smoke series of black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of white singing Ngoshi Sikeli, E Africa, and black singing Jai Stem, the old anthem of the Republic. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. The author recalls the day as the two national anthem of the country, that is, of the blacks and whites were played. When the anthem was played, neither of the groups knew the wordings of the anthem of the blacks. But Mandela was confident that everyone will understand and would soon learn their anthem, which was hated by them. He also said that they will soon learn and sing the anthem by heart. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned peoples of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhuman societies the world had ever known. On the day of the inauguration, the author was having a strong emotional effect when he thought of the past history where the system of apartheid emerged. The author speaks about the next few lines about the time of Anglo-Boer War, that was before his birth, where all the white-skinned people of South Africa built a system of racial domination. Here, racial domination means when people of one race have the power over another race. As a result, one of the harshest, most inhuman society was created. This system created extreme cruelty, injustice, inequality among a particular community. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all peoples regardless of the color of their skin. Now is the time, the last decade of the 20th century and the author's 8th decade as a man along with others had changed their entire system that treats every human equal irrespective of their color, caste, gender or age. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people, people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. The author says that the day has come only because of the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of people. Here, the author wished to thank them. Unfortunately, they didn't live to see the result of their struggle and courage. This made the author feel sad. Though they are not alive to see the freedom, they are also a part of the success. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sizulas, the Chief Lutulas, the Yusuf Daddos, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwe's of our time, men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity that their like may never be known again. The policy of the segregation on the grounds of race scared many people. It will take many years, if not generations, to recover from this intense hurt. But the oppression which took place nearly decades had unplanned effects. That it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sizulis, the Chief Lutulis, the Yusuf Daddos, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukwe's of the author's time. They were the men who had extraordinary courage, wisdom and generosity, who stood up and raised their voice. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. To overcome such a great struggle, it required such a depth of oppression to reach such a great height. He says that South Africa is rich in minerals and gems, but its greatest wealth and strength is its people. They are the precious one, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela gained his strength and courage from these comrades. Here the meaning of comrades is a colleague or a fellow man of an organization. He says that he had seen men and women who took great risks and sacrificed their lives. It was all for one purpose. They stood up to face their attacks and tolerated the torture, and they came forward to show their ability to deal with the kind of hardship and recover from its effects. He also adds that he had learned that the courage was not the absence of fear, but the victory over it. The brave man is not a person who does not feel afraid, but he is a person who conquers that fear. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden, but never extinguished. No one is born with a mentality to hate others. It is taught by its society to hate humans on the basis of the color of their skin, age, gender, and religion. According to the author, if people have learned to hate, then they can also be taught to love, as love comes naturally in every human heart. Even at the very difficult and serious situations in the prison, the humanity Nelson Mandela saw in one of the guards made him remove all the doubts he had about the freedom and made him to think positive and move forward. The goodness which is in human beings can be suppressed or hidden, but it cannot be removed. In life, every man has twin obligations: obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and human society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. According to the author, every man has twin obligation. One is his responsibility towards his family, parents, to his wife and children, and the other one is his obligation to his people, his community, and his society. In a normal situation, each man can fulfill all the obligations according to his natural tendency of behavior and abilities, but it is impossible in a country like South Africa. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart. A twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. Here, if a man comes forward to fulfill his duty to his people, will be arrested and taken away from his family, and he will be in a situation to not fulfill both his responsibilities. In the beginning, Mandela did not give much importance to his people, but it was only later when he realized that in order to be with his people, he was compromising his duty towards his family. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow-moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. The author had no plans to stand against the apartheid in his early life. He just followed the rules set up by his father and the customs in his tribe. He was a free man to run in the fields near his mother's hut, free to swim in the stream that ran through his village, free to roast maize plants under the stars, and rode slow-moving bulls. When the author obeyed his father and followed the customs, he was not troubled by man or God. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, When I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself. The transitory freedom of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased, and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. At the time when the author grew up and began to learn the facts on how people are treated and discriminated, he decided to stand up against it. First, as a student, he wanted freedom only for himself, the transitory freedom, that is, the freedom which was not permanent. Like the freedom to stay out at night and read what he wished and go wherever he wanted to go. After growing up as a young man, he had the feeling or longing for the basic and honorable freedom, that is, to have a peaceful marriage, a family, and to get all the basic needs fulfilled. He explains in such a manner because he knew that freedom cannot be restricted in the place where law and order exists. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. That is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. Finally, he realized that it was not that he only was struggling, but all his brothers and sisters. It was not only the author's freedom, but of everyone's. So, he joined the African National Congress, and that was the time when the hunger for himself and his family urged to become the freedom of his people. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home, that forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. It was the desire for his people to live their life with dignity and self-respect. This was the only cause that changed a frightened young man into a bold one, a law-abiding man to become a criminal, a family-loving husband into a man without home, a life-loving man to live like a monk. He felt that he could not enjoy the basic and limited freedom which was permitted for him when he gained the knowledge that his people were not free. Freedom cannot be separated. If freedom is taken away from some, it is understood that it is equivalent to taken away from everyone. If it is taken away from everyone, then it is also taken away from the author. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. The author knew that the oppressor must be free just as surely as the oppressed. He says that if a man takes away another man's freedom, he is a prisoner of hatred. He will be locked behind the bars of prejudice. Here, prejudice means a strong dislike without any good reason. If one takes away others' freedom, it is sure that he will also not be free if his freedom is taken off. Thus, he finalizes that the oppressed and the oppressor both are robbed of their humanity.